What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and I don't think we've actually recorded a video in a while where we're sitting together, so this is cool. But we are going to be going over the Fantasy Football 1.0 rankings, starting off with the quarterbacks and the running backs. A lot of cool stuff. We do this. We're going to have a bunch of these throughout the year, so we're going to have some final rankings later on, but we're going to start it off with 1.0.
Yeah, and quarterbacks, let's just go ahead and share. We'll get right into it. It's probably going to be pretty chalky. We don't really have many crazy stands. Maybe people have somebody shifted in different areas or directions, but everybody has these four in the same tier. It is Josh Allen, Lamar, Jaden, Jalen. All of them were top four, I believe, QBs in terms of fantasy production last year. I think Joe Burrow kind of had something to say because he had a hell of a second half of the year. But yeah, I mean, it's just they all have rushing upside. They all have, just a dominant amount of touches that are important. And that's kind of what matters. All on good teams. All are going to be contenders this year. And that's just why if you are able to draft one early, you can't go wrong with any of these guys.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy tier to talk about. Like you said, all these guys have upside to do basically everything. And they do. Even with, the situation where you don't always know what receiver is going to get the ball. You look at those guys up there, you're like, okay, Josh Allen. I mean, sure. Shakur's the best receiver, I guess, right now. Keon Coleman, hopefully coming up. Lamar Jackson, his tight ends are his favorites. Jaden, he's got one guy. And then Jalen Hurts, he's got good receivers, but he's got a good running back too. So
yeah, I mean, and then, like I said, the rushing upside there, Jaden and Lamar both going over 800 rushing yards last year. And then Josh and Jalen both having at least 12 rushing touchdowns. So that as it's an RB1 in a quarterback slot. And then you just have to pass upside if they were to be trailing and be able to get some stat padding.
Yeah, the tush push is legal. So
yes,
they kept
matters.
the tush push.
A play is the reason that Jaden is all the way up in tier 1. If not, he might have been a spot or two lower.
Fair.
That's how big of a deal that is.
Absolutely. Let's go to tier 2. Oh, maybe. Okay, there you go. It's a small tier, just two people. It's going to be Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. This is a tier of, the guys that don't have the real rushing upside, but have the arm and the talent around them to make things happen. So that's why they're here. Joe Burrow, like Cam said, had one of the best second halves of the year last year that we've probably ever seen. They're going to have to score 40 points to do anything against any team this year.
Yeah, we just keep seeing the frustrating things that come out about the what they're doing defensively. They just released one of their defensive captains last year in small bright spots in Jermaine Pratt. You were able to pick him up with your Raiders. And then obviously you have the leading sacker in 2024 that is holding out, and then they drafted his replacement, and he apparently may be drafting or going into next year's draft. That's how weird that situation is. And then Mahomes is kind of one of those weird ones because he's obviously the consensus quarterback one in terms of overall talent, but he's just been one that their team has been so good and dominant. He hasn't had the trail. He hasn't had to have the pass catching upside. And then also the last 2 years, the receiving core has been completely depleted. 2023, it was just a terrible receiving core. 2024, everybody had their injuries or got hurt. And so if you saw Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, and then Travis Kelce is your fourth option, maybe you feel a little bit better about Mahomes. This is the lowest he's been going in drafts since we've been, or he's been in the league rather.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those that we just see them with top 5 upside, but at the same time, there's a little bit of a lower floor because there is a little bit more consistency baked in with their situation.
Yeah. And then looking at the next grouping, it's a little bit bigger. We got 8 guys in this one. Kyler Murray starting it off. His situation is coaching, in my opinion, and also if he can play well when it matters late in the year. When you need it, he doesn't always deliver. Is kind of how I look at it. Baker, Caleb, Bo, Justin, all those guys. A lot of fun players to look at. A lot of big arms. I actually really am excited to see what happens with the rushing upside from 4 out of the 5 of those guys, for sure.
And I want you guys to get in the comments, tell us who you're vibing with this year and all that stuff. But this exact tier, I don't want to hear this guy 14 versus 7. There is such a razor-thin margin between these 8 guys that it is straight up who is the best value, who you're stacking with, and what is your preference, where they're currently going, because they're jumbled everywhere. 7 to 14, I feel like they're all just kind of like serviceable guys that it depends on how you're building your team. That's just kind of how I would truly break it down at the very end. But I mean, Kyler's got the rushing upside. If he just kind of has the second half of the season can get there to where he's not just inconsistent. Baker ended up as a top 5 quarterback last year. Was that a little bit too good to be true, or them adding to Mecca and Chris Godwin being back, does he just kind of replenish and just continue to do so? Caleb, we expect a true bounce back, and he could very well launch himself into another tier when it comes down to it, but we have to see it. Bo Nix breakout year. Justin Fields, can he just be true rushing quarterback, or is he just kind of dust as a fantasy asset? I'm not sure. Dak 2 years ago was QB2 overall. Last year was hurt, and he basically has been back and forth between top 5 fantasy quarterback and injured quarterback. Brock Purdy's been very steady since he's been the starter there, and then Justin Herbert, rather, he's just in a situation where he's a very talented guy, has the least amount of pass attempts of all these guys, maybe some of the least amount of rushing upside as well. So what do you do with that kind of thing?
One guy I want to talk about is Dak because he is 5 spots higher based on average. And of course, those are best ball averages because right now we don't have fantasy football averages like Yahoo. There's no Yahoo out there. But based on averages, we are 5 spots higher on Dak. And I thought that was good. It's something to shout out. Of course, this is for fantasy football, not for our best ball leagues. But Dak has the upside that you're talking about, that we kind of think he's in another tier rather than in that next tier that we're going to get into right now.
Right.
Next tier, 9 guys, a lot of young guys. And I think that that's really something to point out is we're also, some of these guys' value and like position on this board is kind of baked into the fact that they just haven't done it or they haven't consistently done it. And then there's a lot of old guys coming out of their prime or injury guys like Tua. Matthew Stafford's much older. Geno's a much older guy. So it's kind of that tier where you got the older and the younger, and then above that is kind of the prime.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential with this group. There's a lot of lows potentially as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like the bottom, or at least the vets, if you're going to talk about Stafford, Geno, Jared Goff, Tua, no rushing upside whatsoever. So this is a straight up, can they pass for 4,500 yards and 30 plus touchdowns with their guys? And if they can't, then they're probably not worth it.
Right, exactly.
Tier. But then there's some guys where it's like JJ, Drake May, Trevor, CJ, all first round picks, early picks that we're just like, hey, we're waiting to see it. Jordan Love had a huge breakout second half of his first year as a starter and then had a step back last year. But a lot of that also had to do with his own injuries, his receiver injuries. So it's kind of like, what side of the pendulum are you swinging? Do you have some kind of floor that we can establish, or are you just going to kind of bottom out? This is a true prove it kind of tier right here.
I put CJ and Jordan Love in the same grouping with that whole sophomore slump, even knowing Jordan Love was in the league. You know, he still had a sophomore slump being a second-year starter. Trevor needs to figure it out. But I do think that, if I had to bet on a guy in this group, I hope that Trevor does the best. He does have a receiving core that I like and stuff like that.
This is a huge range of just hey, all of these are serviceable QB2s if you're in super flex league or you're talking best ball. Of course, you're needing 2 to 3 quarterbacks in those kind of drafts. But QB1, drafting this in a redraft league, in a 1 QB league, it's really hard to trust any of these guys from a week in, week out basis. And it feels like you're just going to have to, switch them back and forth and just hope that you're right. Because a lot of times when you do that, it's really hard, especially at quarterback or even tight end, when it's just I got 2 of these guys and I don't know every single week which one I'm playing.
Yeah, that's a big thing that, we talk about when we do best ball drafts and stuff too. It's getting a guy this is a tier that we're hey, I don't think I can have them at my QB1. And that's something even in your friend league, I don't know if you're a 12-team league that you want one of these guys to be your QB1 consistently throughout the year.
Right.
Last 2 guys on this board, tier 5. We're going to talk about Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson. And that's a very interesting conversation actually right here. I know there's only 2 guys, but Anthony Richardson might be one of the biggest conversation pieces we're going to have on this whole board. So
yeah, with Anthony, this to me, I know it kind of seems strange being at 25, but he is straight up a placement holder of insert Indianapolis quarterback, because if you know defiantly that it's going to be Anthony Richardson's show or Daniel Jones, either one of them have top 20 upside as a fantasy quarterback, let alone being the 25th. Both of them going past that in ADP. And on top of that, all of them have a valuable amount of stacking options. Josh Downs, Michael Pittman going in the wide receiver 4 or 5 range. Tyler Warren is a pretty heavy discount on multiple platforms right now. So it's really easy to kind of get to it. I like the situation. It's indoors, all that fun stuff. And they both have rushing upside. So it's one of those, like, as long as you can, they're probably both going to be undrafted in redraft leagues, and that's fine because you can just waiver wire them when you need them.
Yeah.
And then in best ball, they're both going. We did a best ball draft recently. One's in the 17th round, one's in the 19th round. If you just draft them both, you've got Indy QB2 as your second quarterback, and that's probably going to get you through half the season.
Yeah. And then Bryce Young, because we don't want to leave him out. That's kind of,
Yeah,
we had
and he had a huge second half of the year.
Yeah.
He had a bunch of rushing upside. He had a multi-rushing touchdown game in one of the weeks in the fantasy playoffs. I think in terms of points per game, if I remember correctly.
Insert a wide receiver 1, possible player with Tet, add that too.
I mean, the second half of the year, especially the December part, when he really kind of truly came into his own, I thought it was a terrible mistaken decision for them to bench him as early as they did for Andy Dalton, but then they gave him the job back, and he made the most of it to where he has the full offseason knowing that he's the starter. So better receiving group, core, improvements everywhere. So hopefully he can just kind of have a little bit more consistency, especially as a fantasy asset. Another one that at this point, you're really not getting to these guys unless you're in multi-quarterback formats.
I mean, one thing that I just want to add, three sophomore players in their receiving core. Jatavian Sanders, Xavier Legette, and Jalen Coker. Add a rookie, but they're really young. It's a really fun group, and we'll see what happens. Let's go over to running backs. Running backs are next on our board. Tier 1 of running backs. Obviously, Saquon is 1 overall because he was basically you needed him to win a bunch of leagues last year. But this whole group has an opportunity to be the number 1 overall running back. And that includes a rookie that plays for my team, the Raiders, in Ashton Genty. And I'm very excited to see what happens. Obviously, I wanted us to not go running back at so early, but I'm still excited. He excites me as a player. He was our dark horse on this show when we started this whole draft process back in
the
summer.
biggest thing with him is that he is the highest ADP of all time in terms of a true rookie coming into it. And now it's kind of tempered out a little bit, but he's still a middle first-round pick, which is higher than you've ever seen for a rookie. But it's warranted because they were dead last in running back production. He came in, and all he's fighting with is a mid-30s Raheem Mostert for legitimate touches. And so he's going to get every single important touch from the running back backfield. And that's why we like him so much. Christian McCaffrey, let's not forget that he's just, if he's healthy, he's the best running back to have in a fantasy PPR format, especially because this is a PPR ranking.
Right.
Just wanted to clarify that because that is an important one. But yeah, as long as you're healthy, do it. And if you're concerned about his health, just draft his backups because we saw multiple backups last year have RB2S performances. Isaac Randall going for 100 yards a couple times. Jordan Mason was a waiver wire pickup of the year for 6 weeks. But if you don't trust him to, sustain long-term health, just draft their handcuff and you're going to be good to go there. Jahmyr Gibbs is actually lower because he is in tier 1 with us, but a lot of people have him as RB3 or even RB2, depending on who you listen to. But we just kind of think there's a little bit of a step back coming, and there's a lot of really high ADPs. And these other guys, there is no competition for touches. Whereas Jahmyr, you've got a fellow first-rounder in another position with Detroit. You've got another RB2 in David Montgomery, who's had back-to-back seasons with 12 touchdowns. And then just it goes on from there. Tight end 1 with Sam Laporta.
Right.
There's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. And if Detroit does take a step back, I don't anticipate this backfield having 30 rushing touchdowns again with Ben Johnson no longer there.
Yep. I think that Jahmyr is definitely, between me and you, we actually had a conversation. It was like, who's our least favorite first rounder? And it's like Jahmyr Gibbs based on where his ADP is. And it makes sense.
I also asked him, say you got a middle round pick. Out of 10 drafts, G&T, Gibbs are both on the board. Who are you picking? And I was like, are you going 10 out of 10 G&T? And he was like, yes. And I was like, so why do we have him below Ashton G&T as our ranking? So that's why we ended up punting him down. It may seem disrespectful, but it's just kind of like, hey, we know G&T's going to get 350 touches pending health.
Right.
And Jahmyr, it's kind of like, hey, he was a high touchdown volatile guy. And actually, he isn't really getting the receiving upside you would think that his style warrants.
Right.
He really didn't truly show that until David went down. So you're relying on David Montgomery to go down in order to pay off as a top 5 pick. That's just kind of one of those things.
Fair. All right, tier 2.
Big list.
Yeah,
of,
it is.
Just guys that are capable of being top 5 running backs. JT, Derrick Henry, HN as the PPR. Again, major emphasis on it being a PPR ranking. And then Kyron, Josh, Chase Brown coming into his own, and they don't really invest too much in the position this offseason. And then Omarion Hampton, the other first-round running back.
We're definitely highest on Omarion Hampton if you just look at overall rankings across the board. Right now, Omarion Hampton, let me grab it, is only 4 spots higher for us, right? But that's a lot,
no
actually.
No one else has him in a tier 2-esque position.
Right.
They're just like, hey, he's into 4th round, and most of these guys are going late 2nd, early 3rd. So we are very, very high on him. Najee, even though being in the fold, it's not like Gus Edwards had much of an impact on JK when JK was healthy. It's kind of one of those things where I think that, hey, maybe he'll take him away from a potential 15 touchdown role, but that's okay because you don't need to have 15 touchdowns to, return value on your ADP as a late 4th rounder. You just need the 12 to 1,500 yard upside, which he has that in spades. He had back-to-back years with over 2,000 scrimmage yards, and he was just somebody that we were in love with coming out.
Yeah, and also we're going to be a little bit lower on a couple of guys. Also, if you look Derrick Henry's mostly going to be, you're going to get him in at 5. And so we're just a little lower on him. JT we're a little bit higher on, but this is kind of how this range looks on everybody's board otherwise. So this is a pretty easy range to talk about. Upside is pass catchers, workhorses, 15 touchdown upside for almost every guy up there except for Chase Brown maybe, and I guess maybe HN.
Yeah.
But otherwise it's there.
I mean, Derrick Henry, even though he was very talented, he's Hall of Famer, one of the best running backs we've seen of this generation. He's older. He had less than 50% of the snaps, and his backup was Justice Hill last year. Mm-hmm. So they really aren't truly using him unless it's just to score. But you're playing from ahead. He's basically a one-way player, and that doesn't mean that Baltimore is not going to be winning 12 to 13 times this season. But it's just one of those, I'd rather just get somebody that can always get there no matter what.
Exactly. All right, next tier 3. Oh, come on, tier 3. I believe in Breece Hall starting it off. We have a conversation to have about Breece Hall here in a second, but Kenneth Walker is one of our biggest differentials, positive differentials on this whole board. We have him 6 spots higher than everybody, and Bucky Irving is our biggest negative differential, at least in the top 30 people, at 6 spots lower. We're not as high on Bucky Irving. We weren't as high on Bucky Irving last year. We weren't high on him as a recruit or as a prospect. It is what it is, guys. We just don't know.
Yeah, this whole tier kind of is the epitome of the tier that we're really not getting to via ADP right now.
Right.
But they're guys that we like. It just kind of depends on the platform you're drafting in. The one that I truly am, like you said, taking a stand on is Bucky Irving. I'm not investing a 2nd round pick in him. I know he did well, but he's just an okay running back in a just volume-based situation. But Kenneth Walker, I think, is a very talented top 10 back that when he has had injury issues, but contract year, and every time he's come back from injury after their backup, Zach Charbonnet, most recently, has done well in his absence, they just gave it all right back to Kenneth Walker. And we've faded him in times where it's just like, well, he's back. It's a tough matchup. I don't know. And then against the number 1 rush defense, 3 touchdowns in his first game back on limited touches. He just has all the boom, and on top of that, because DK and Tyler are gone, and it's Sam Darnold now at the helm, maybe they rely on him a little bit more, especially in the contract year, and so that's why we like him a lot.
James Cook, got to talk about real quick before we move on to the next tier. James Cook has not shown up to minicamp, I don't believe, at all.
He's been there. I don't know how
active
he is,
right.
But he's also searching for a contract. He led the tie for the league in touchdowns last year as a running back. And it's one of those like, hey, was that a one-off year? Because of this group, everybody else has 20 touch upside on a weekly basis. He's got 15 touch upside. Yeah,
and some in the pass catching, but more so like he's going to miss out to a Ray Davis coming in and taking his, who's the other one? I can see his face with the curly hair.
Oh, Ty Johnson.
Ty Johnson, yeah. So he misses
also,
some touches.
Last but not least, Joe Mixon. We dropped him a couple spots before we even put this out. Because of the fact that Nick Chubb just signed there. And on top of that, we still have to realize this is the worst offensive line in football going into it. So he is a true volume-based running back. And if there's any kind of potential that Nick
Chubb,
Chubb takes away goal line reps and he just is like a 20 touch for 70 yards and maybe a score, that's really going to bring him down because there's a lot of rookies coming up in the other tier that has the upside of pass catching work and maybe just kind of end up running away with it in better situations.
Exactly. And then let's go to tier 4. Tier 4 is start with Alvin Kamara, and then we have a run of rookies. We'd love to see that. And including on this run of rookies, we also have DeAndre Swift, who sits in the middle of it, who is 6 spots higher than he is based on regular ADP. We don't necessarily love DeAndre Swift as a running back, but we love his situation. Chicago, as a number 1 running back in Chicago, and all their mouths and their new OC and like everything that's going on there, it's really pretty. And I really wish they would have drafted somebody, honestly.
Yeah, and in a worse situation, playing from behind, still had a stretch last year where he had 4 or 5 games over 20 fantasy points, but a lot of the time, touches were spotty because it's like, oh, we're down 21-0, and
right.
Something's got to give. But Ben Johnson, much better situation. Back-to-back seasons where there was 30-plus touchdowns from that running back room. So it's just one of those things where DeAndre Swift and Roschon, you may not believe in them as a talent, but at least in a situation, they should both outperform their ADP, which is why we had to put him in here with these other running backs that we probably like as a talent much more than them.
Fair.
Other than, I guess, James Conner. We equally
sure.
dislike him as much.
Yeah.
But James Conner, we've seen he's always there as an RB2, and he gets all the volume, and it is what it is. And then these other 3 rookies, pick your poison. Like, which one do you like the most? I don't really care. I mean, Travion is the best pass catching / pass blocking of these bunch, and he's could be inheriting the best situation offensively because Cleveland and Pittsburgh should be such an eyesore this year to watch offensively. But Quinshon, new running back situation and regime, and I don't expect Dylan Sampson to just completely make it a 50-50 like we saw with Ohio State with Travion and him last year. Caleb Johnson stays in black and yellow, and it's him fighting with Jalen Warren. Hopefully, I don't know. Najee was always the top.
Caleb will be above him.
Yeah,
to say the
Najee was
least.
more talented. I'm sorry. Caleb was more talented than Najee, and Najee was just always he gets you 1,000 yards and maybe 10 touchdowns, and he could just walk right into that.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm hoping for. We're drafting a ton of rookies. We keep doing it, so we will continue to do that for sure.
Right.
Going on to tier 5, and in tier 5 we have some names that are going to be interesting to talk about, but we also have some older running backs. We have Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones, and David Montgomery, who are all a little bit older. But one guy that we have to point out while we start is another rookie. That is RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey is actually currently ranked above all the other rookies in tier 4 on the platforms, even knowing we have him behind them.
Yeah, and that may be, there need to be a little bit of correction because JK just signed.
Right, of course.
That's not all the way up to date, but we did see RJ Harvey in recent drafts kind of fall into the middle of the 5th. So he's kind of trending in this direction. Maybe we're a little early on it, but it is what it is. This is the tier of just kind of you're the 1A of a kind of deeper room, or 1B for the matter of David Montgomery, but he has the 1A workload.
Right, of course.
That the others are going to also have. Aaron Jones, like you said, kind of aging out, but he's also Jordan Mason they signed, and they sound really excited about him in Minnesota. So maybe it's just kind of, hey, sometimes these guys might get 20 touches, sometimes they might get 7. There's a lot of versatility with the amount of touches they could get. Isaiah Pacheco had all the workload because there was no competition, broke his leg, and then he couldn't come back and really usurp Kareem Hunt, who was not playing well. He just had all the touches. Tony Pollard did fine, but it was his least efficient year via advanced stats. Tajee Spears dealt with concussions, but I still view them as a very similar of just riding the hot hand approach. Brian Robinson probably has the least amount of talent behind him of this entire room, but at the same time, he has the most fumbling problems of this tier. So it's one of those like, hey, he has the room in a top 5-esque offense to just get a lot of volume. But at the same time, we saw multiple times last year where, they didn't give it to him a lot down the stretch because it's just like sometimes it's hard to trust him.
Yep. And then let's go to the last tier on this board. Starting it off, we got Travis Etienne, who we hope will have the bounce back that, we think he could have. Cam Scatterbo, a young guy, and then a group of RB2s. Basically, if you think that Tyron Tracy is an RB2 in this situation, and if you think that Travion will usurp Ramondre Stevenson.
Well, a lot of people actually have Tyron right now above Cam Scatterbo on the Giants. The problem is their schedule is hard as hell, and it doesn't feel comfortable, investing in that offense from the running back perspective. But we actually have them flipped. Most people, like I said, have Tyron in front, but we just think that they invest more draft capital in Cam, and we just think he'll down the stretch. You think cold weather football, somebody to grind it out is somebody like him.
Plus, he was a better, in my opinion, and on our rankings, he was a better prospect.
Yes.
So that was something that, that always helps because Tyron coming out, I didn't even have him top 7, and Cam was top 5.
Straight up a kind of, at this point, we're getting to the best ball or handcuff best portion of things because,
right.
I am on board with you with Travis being, breaking above his ADP, having a bounce back year, and making the most of his opportunity compared to the rest of his running back room. But at the same time, I can't go into week 1, even in a good matchup, and just start him outright. I need to wait and see, but I do have the optimism he could return. Javonte is kind of somebody similar that we really loved him as a prospect coming out, had a torn ACL, and then just never really got in sync in a Sean Payton-led offense. But he is, at the very least, as a talent, better than Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle last year, back-to-back 100-yard games in the fantasy postseason, had 1,000 yards for the year. If he can do that, so can Javonte. And so it's just kind of one of those things with him. Jalen, will you catch passes? That's what matters to me. With Aaron Rodgers, they don't really have a ton of depth at the receiver room. So can he catch 4 to 5 passes and become a top 25-ish fringe option as a running back like he was in 2023?
Right, exactly. This is a pretty fun group, though, like when you're just talking about it, because this group in tier 5, like I actually see a big separation in just like name value if you just talk about it. But like some of these guys are going to jump into that higher group, and it'll be cool to see who that actually is and who.
Yeah, this is the last
kind of balances
This is the last group of the bunch that I think will have a role no matter what the injury statuses are.
Right.
But after this, it is spraying and praying and hoping the guy in front of them went down.
Yeah.
We'll kind of get into that once we get into tier 7.
Yeah, we'll jump over now. Tier 7 is a big tier. It's 13 players. And with that being said, all of them are basically handcuffs.
Yes.
Straight handcuffs. They're all going to be the backup to their top running back. And if you just look across the board, if any of those guys go down, these guys normally are going to be the ones to step in and get the bulk of the run.
Yeah, I mean, Zach Charbonnet is starting off. Like, he struggled in his rookie year, and honestly, we don't love him as a running back, as a talent. But last year, when Kendall Walker went down on 2 separate occasions, chalky running back, and he returned value. He had a 40 fantasy point week. He had another multi-touchdown week. Najee is just straight up, hey, he's just going to be volume king if Omarion Hampton were to go down. But he's probably the one that maybe has an argument to be in the tier above because he probably will still have a role. But Tajay Spears, really like him. He really came onto his own. He was more efficient than Tony, so maybe he can usurp him. Trey Benson, we liked. He was our RB1 in 2024. Had a down rookie year. And James Conner is just one. Can you finally get hurt and just not be good anymore?
Not be in the way.
Jaden Blue, kind of similar to what we said. Javonte, it's just the opportunity is there for Dallas. Anybody that was going to be a Dallas Cowboy running back is going to be higher on our board than others. Roshan, we mentioned with Swift, just Chicago running back. We just like that situation. Garindo, don't love him as a talent, but we saw what, Christian McCaffrey, when he went down, they just go next man up. And then that you can say the same with all these guys.
Well, I want to say that, if you're going to talk about guys that actually have like a role, there's like 3 like that have a role before you like even go from there. That's Najee, like you said. I think Tajay actually has a role, like a natural role there, probably 40% of the snaps. And then I'm wondering what the Rashad White, Bucky Irving splits are going to be because
he really
they're the same people though. They're the same player in my opinion. So it's going to be one of those things too.
Yeah, I mean they kind of really rode the hot hand with Bucky at the end of the season, and I think there was a couple games where Rashad White had 2 or 3 touches, which is reasonable because it's not like we love him as a prospect.
No,
but same things with like Ray Davis. He had breakout game. The one game that James Cook went down. Braylon Allen, he actually was the one of this list that didn't make the most of his opportunity when Breece Hall missed some time because I think it was Isaiah Davis.
Isaiah Davis,
They
yeah.
completely went 50-50 split, and that was surprising to me. But it is a new regime now, so who knows? He is still the youngest on this board, even though he's a second-year pro.
Mm-hmm.
Rico Dowdle, we mentioned having a 1,000-yard season. He's just but they're going to ride Chuba into the ground, and when Chuba's down, we'll go ahead and say Rico's next man up unless we see Trevor Etienne get more snaps.
Right. The one that we haven't talked about because this is a big tier, J.K. Dobbins. And we needed to just throw out there, he did just get signed, so he, could move up or down this board depending on reports. But he is now a Denver Bronco, and he is going to be taking, probably some of the more important snaps on the goal line.
Yeah,
so that's important.
You wouldn't think it based on how last year went, but I saw a stat that Denver had like the 8th most expected points holistically out of the backfield last year, but they just completely like RB by committee. Every single guy's getting 7 to 8 touches. Right. And then maybe Jalil, because he played, I guess, the best by default of the 3, sometimes got 10 to 12. But now it's just really more defined of just, hey, RJ Harvey and JK. And I'm actually not sure how that split's going to go, but JK did well until he got hurt last year, sprained his MCL. And then RJ Harvey, we liked him as a running back. He did get overdrafted. And I just wouldn't assume he's just going to immediately inherit touches to be a 5th round pick, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I'm on the same page with RJ. Let me stop sharing. That is our quarterbacks and running backs 1.0 for fantasy football. We really appreciate y'all hanging out with us. If you haven't yet, please like and comment and subscribe on this video. Tell us who y'all's favorite quarterbacks, who we have too high, who we have too low, quarterback, running back wise,
and just kind of taking. Like there's like you got to be different. I'm not gonna just like rearrange the same tier and same order for every single tier. Compared to other guys, we have to take stands somehow, and I'm not afraid to be wrong. So let us know where you are in the disagreement, but who are you vibing with, though? That's the main thing. And a lot of these guys, even though it may be, at the start of a tier or the end of the tier may be so tight. Like I mentioned, that tier of 8 quarterbacks, they are literally raising it points.
Yeah, razor thin.
So it's one of those things. It's all a preference, and we want to know what you guys think.
Absolutely. So we appreciate y'all, and we will see y'all on the next one.